I rise today to speak against the Local Government Amendment Governance and Integrity Bill 2024. Just a little while back, I called upon the Minister for Local Government to ensure that her department would operate as a model litigant and overhaul her department's councillor code of conduct regime by relinquishing control of the process to an independent agency like the Inspectorate, by ensuring that councillors are provided with indemnity against lawsuits, and withdrawing her plans to force the lowest paid, lowest level of elected government representatives to lodge their privately funded code of conduct appeals in the Supreme Court, the highest, most expensive court in the country, instead of VCAT. And none of that is included in this bill. If we're going to be talking about integrity, then we need to remember that integrity is undermined by conflicts of interest and concentrations of power, and this bill just entrenches them. Government ministers, whether we like it or not, represent political parties that seek to win and keep power. I don't actually have a problem with that. I have a problem with poorly framed laws that don't create checks and balances. So it's just a fact that ministers have a conflict of interest when they get to decide the fate of other democratically elected representatives. That's just outrageous. What a terrible, terrible law this is. Especially ministers who are from other political parties. We have Labor, Greens and probably soon to be Liberal Party endorsed local government candidates. You cannot be seriously expecting us to believe that a Labor Party government minister, or even a Liberal one for that matter, is going to be believed if they overturn any kind of local government council election, their right to represent their constituents, if they're from a different party. It's not going to pass the pub test. People in the public shouldn't have to put in so much effort to trust the government. These kinds of things shouldn't be allowed. Oversight should be given to an independent body like the Inspectorate. This is not a dictatorship, as I have said before, whether or not they like the idea, and this government needs to start having some respect for the fact that we are actually a democracy. And if we're going to talk about good governance, then we need to remember that good governance is based on clear laws that promote justice and which are applied equally to all. And again, this bill entrenches subjective biased laws. It incentivises the misuse of the arbitration process because there's no financial burden on making a complaint, whereas defending yourself against a complaint requires a huge personal financial impost. That is absurd. That is bad legislation. Also, this bill denies natural justice. The arbitration panel and the arbitrators have no requirement for proper rules of evidence. Everything is decided on the opinion of the arbiter, and they are not required to have proper legal qualifications. And complaints can be based on somebody taking offence. There is nobody here that would survive if that standard was applied. Let's just be real. All right, let's go through some examples. We've got cases that look extremely biased already. We've got Councillor Jasmine Hill at Wyndham, suspended for months despite no concrete evidence of the claims made against her ever being produced. Councillor Susan Bissinger at Mornington Peninsula, where the CEO publicly announced that she had been banned from talking to council staff and then refused to even tell her why. And when she made a guess in public as to why, she was suspended. Former councillor Stephen Hughes from Frankston Council, who was suspended on the basis that he made negative comments about the performance of council. I would have thought that was part of his job. Councillor Daria Callender from Hobsons Bay was suspended for explaining in an internal email to other councillors that she felt uncomfortable participating in a closed-door meeting that she thought would unduly influence the outcome of the mayoral vote. Unbelievable. And then Mayor Briffa was declared guilty of misconduct for naming and defaming me, as it happens, and she received no sanction whatsoever at all. She was not even required to apologise or take those publications down, and yet Councillor Vandenberg from Melton City Council was found guilty of exactly the same kinds of things against every single other councillor there. She was forced to apologise and suspended for a month. Where is the standard of evidence or treatment? That's completely biased. Councillor Melissa Ferguson at Latrobe City Council was forced to make a ridiculous apology simply for asking questions about where public bushfire recovery funds had gone, and then she was suspended and required to apologise for retweeting a post privately about concerns about a person who is now being investigated for pedosadism. Oscar Yildiz from Merribeck was publicly vilified by some of his own fellow councillors to the point where he was receiving death threats, and yet nothing has happened about that. Councillors Tarkos and Kerr at Brimbank were denied any chance at mediation before being served with an incredibly long list of complaints that went past the 3-month rule. And let's not forget that these totally biased arbitration processes are ultimately made public. So the psychological distress about defamation and having your career ruined privately and in the sector are real. And if we're going to talk about accountability, let's not forget that it should be for everybody. Witch hunts are not accountability. So why does this bill only go after councillors, as if councillors are the only source of authority and bad behaviour in these organisations? What about the CEOs and the executive? What about the gaslighting and the bullying by council CEOs and executives against councillors who don't toe the party line or do what they're told or make the job easy? How are councillors supposed to hold the CEO, the executive and everybody else to account and ensure good governance when they are blocked from their from gaining information? I'm speaking from my own experience as a councillor now. I could not believe it that when I asked for the raw data on the never-ending series of reports that I was given, that I was denied that data. I used to be a researcher and you always attach at the end the raw data in an annex. But I was told that all I was allowed to receive was a report which covered the themes of what the data revealed. And I said, what I would like to see is the actual data which tells me the exact proportion of who agreed with this policy. I never got that. I got elected to state parliament before I could bring that one up. And I've heard lots of people talk about the behaviour of councillors who are now in state parliament. I don't know about Mr McCracken or anyone else here, but I've never had a complaint lodged against me, not once, not ever in any job, by the way, until this one. So let's not just be looking at other areas of government. And I heard it said by my esteemed colleague over here that socialism would be very well placed in local government council. I thought I'd tell you this little anecdote. When I was a councillor, I noticed a line from Karl Marx's manifesto in my briefing notes. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. What's this about the collection and redistribution of wealth? What's that doing in there? And they went bright red and they said, oh, it must be a mistake, it must be a mistake. They didn't realise that I'd done international relations and I had that book on my shelf and I got the quote directly out in front of them. There is bad behaviour everywhere. That's why you have to have fair rules that apply to everyone, not just to one level. And when we talk about the mandatory training, hilarious. I could not get enough training as a councillor. We had a problem getting it passed and paid for. And may I just tell you another little anecdote? We had to beg the Human Rights Commissioner and the Sex Discrimination Commissioner to come and speak to us at Melton City Council to explain the laws and how they applied on the local government level. And in the middle of that training, the human rights trainer said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer any more of your questions, I have to go. And he never came back. I would have loved to experience that training, but I just couldn't get them there. All right, so let's talk about some examples on the CEO and executive level. I happen to know that Minister Horn is aware of a report into a corrupt CEO that has never been published, and that is against the public interest. And this CEO is now continuing, by all reports, his corrupt behaviour and bullying tactics and giving mates rates and misuse of his position as a CEO at a different council. Nothing's being done. Why does he get away with it? One mayor was provided with another councillor's personal home address so that she could write a threatening letter on council letterhead paper delivered by registered post to be delivered to that councillor's home, wherein this mayor threatened that councillor for raising the issue of misuse of taxpayer funds, for pointless junkets, and for raising the issue of community outrage on gender-neutral toilets. The threat was clear. This councillor was not to embarrass that mayor again, or a complaint would be made to the biased internal arbitration process. And it included a demand for a personal meeting within 7 days. That is outrageous. How dare the personal address be given out by the executive? Nothing was done. One governance team even created a councillor complaints handling policy dictating the process for when a community member complains to council about a councillor. And it was used to bury complaints about councillors. But that policy was never even endorsed by councillors. They never saw it. What recourse to justice, what recourse to any kind of oversight do the councillors have in that instance? None. They've complained to the minister and they've heard nothing. That policy actually was used to dismiss a complaint from a member of the public, and the complaint was then referred to the arbitration panel, and even there, that councillor was found guilty. What councillors need actually is more individual powers. They need legislated rights to demand information from their council so that they can do their job. They need protection from spurious, subjective complaints being made by petty, ridiculous people who don't understand public service. That's what this bill should have done. I'll finish with this. The fact that this government over here, this Labor government, with their new Premier given, but the old Premier, altogether, they spent about $1 million bitterly fighting all the way to the High Court to prevent an independent investigation of the red shirts wrought abuse of public funds. And that tells us all we need to know about this government's attitude toward taxpayers' money and genuine accountability. And this is just a disgraceful bill, and I condemn it.